Sí,
Pueden estimular el intercambio con Liverpool.
Muchas gracias, chao.
Chao. Ok, buenos días a todos y a todas. Estamos ya listos para comenzar. Voy a hacer esta primera parte de la introducción al seminario de hoy del ISIM, que me toca coordinar. Se trata de la conferencia o la presentación Avances en análisis federados en el Reino Unido, desafíos de gobernanza y evidencia en salud poblacional. Tenemos el agrado de presentar a dos interesantes invitados, Becca Wilson and Oli Butters de la Universidad de Liverpool. I'll do sort of mix of introduction in English and Spanish. I'll have to say that Rebecca is one of the UK Research Innovators Fellows at the moment. She's working at the Institute of Population Health Science in Liverpool. She's focused currently on understanding how we can access health data in safe ways to produce large-scale transformation of all health systems using all the information we already have collecting through the healthcare system. Becca is also currently researcher at the Health Research UK Hub, where she's also promoting new ideas on using data shield as a way to access different type of data and use this information for conducting research, for example, using non-disclosure analysis data from medical text, and also using new techniques for visualizing data and in health research. We also have Oli Butters, who is also senior research associated at the Institute of Population Health in Liverpool. Oli, as Rebecca, is also coming from the world of physics. So as many data scientists currently are coming from the physical science today, both have a long experience working not only conducting research, but also teaching and developing software for analytic purposes in health research. Both have a long career working with different large population studies and also conducting research across Europe. And they will conduct this presentation in two voices. So welcome both. I think both also have some relationship with Chile when you were in the astronomic science. So you were visiting also Oli, Chile at some point. And I'm very happy to have this presentation of you today and all the opportunities we are opening with this collaboration between all groups. Welcome.
You can share your presentation.
Right, I hope that you can see that. Oh yeah, I can see it. Thank you, Miguel, for the introduction. We're both really pleased to be able to present to you today about recent advancements in the UK health data infrastructure that sort of was set in motion about 3 or 4 years ago. So, hang on, it's not moving. Oh, there we go. So there's a few different parts that we're going to talk about. So I'll start first of all with the historical methods that we used to use to access health data securely and safely. And then I'm going to give an example of what happens when responsible data custodianship fails, just as, I guess, a reminder of what can go wrong. And then I'll move into the modern context of health data research and health data sharing. And then we'll look at some of the programs of recent UK digital infrastructure investment within academia and the NHS in the UK. And then we'll finish up with some examples of what we're doing in our own research project, the Data Shield project, along the lines of federated data analysis. So I'm going to take you back to the late 2000s, early 2010s. It's a long time ago now. At the time, there were kind of like three main ways in which health data was being accessed and analysed. The first way was data custodians were emailing copies of data, or analysts were downloading these data from a secure server. I actually recall receiving data on an encrypted hard drive that was couriered to me from some other institute in the UK. And our research group itself also has in the past posted to other people encrypted hard drives with data on it as well. And obviously with these methods of data, you're analysing the data on downloading the data onto your own machine, and you're analysing this information on your own computer. The other method that was commonly used was that researchers would travel to the site where the data was held and analyse the data at that location. Now, these access and analysis mechanisms were perfectly safe and secure if, for example, the data was encrypted, it was pseudonymized, and there were legal contracts in place in order to govern the terms and conditions of those data use. But with these first two methods, the data owner had to have a high level of trust in the researcher, that research was following good IT practice, keeping up to date their laptop with software updates and with antivirus updates, etc. And also the data owner would have to trust that researcher has not given out any copies of that data to anyone else that wasn't authorized or approved to use that data. And also trust that researcher hadn't retained a copy of the data after they'd completed their analysis. Problems with, I guess, some of the limitations of having to travel to a site to analyze data is obviously the cost, and also the administrative burden of perhaps organising visas and setting up IT accounts at that host institute. Even when you're travelling within your own country, these costs can be quite high. And these costs also disproportionately affect researchers from low and middle income countries, who are often those that have the rarer data sets as well. So I want to give a really famous example from the UK that led to a failure in public trust with respect to sharing healthcare data for research. And this actually happened prior to the introduction of GDPR and the enactment of that within our own UK legislation. I guess this is kind of like a guide of what not to do. So in 2016, Google DeepMind announced a collaboration with an NHS trust in London that involved 3 hospitals. And the aim was to build an application to help clinicians that were treating kidney disease. And this app aimed to streamline alerts, as well as the access to patient data for the medical staff that were working in frontline medical care. So it wasn't a general medical app for alerts or data access or a messaging platform. It was specifically focused on a single use case around the detection of acute kidney injury in patients. And what happened was in early 2016, new scientists, sort of like the popular science and academic publication, gained access to a copy of the data sharing agreement between Google DeepMind and the Royal Free NHS Trust. And this data sharing agreement had been set up in 2015 and was to run until 2017 across 3 of the hospitals in that trust. And this new scientist expose, if anyone wants to read it, there's a copy online. This new scientist expose caused widespread media attention, public anger, and triggered an independent academic review about this particular project. This review was published in 2017, and it found that, well, a number of failures of the particularly around the governance of the project. It found that we did not know what Google DeepMind were doing with the patient data that they, as part of this project, nor the extent to which the Royal Free's control was over what was actually being, how the data was actually being utilised. Any assurances given by DeepMind about not using patient data with AI tools as part of this project only came from press releases and public statements. There was no reference to it in any formal oversight in the project, and also not in any legally binding contracts either. The amount of data that was transferred was found to be in excess of what the requirements of the publicly stated needs. So, they were building an app specifically for patients that were suffering from acute kidney injury, which was about 1/6 of the total patients across the 3 hospitals. But this data collaboration agreement actually gave them access to data on all patients at all 3 hospitals in the trust. That was access to all admissions, discharge and transfer data, A&E pathology and radiology data, and critical care data at the 3 hospitals, plus 5 years of historical medical records data on patients that had been treated at the hospital. And this was around 1.6 million patients. But the review found that the data sharing agreement was that the data that was provided was not in breach of the data sharing agreement and the memorandum of understanding that was governing this particular project. Further damning review of this project was that the data transfer was done without consulting any of the regulatory bodies in the UK that govern the transfer of data of this nature. And none of the individuals the patients that were in the data set were even informed or told about the use of this data by Google, and their consent was never asked for either. The justification for this project, as I said, this is pre the enactment of GDPR. The justification of this project relied on an argument that DeepMind was in a direct care relationship with each patient that was at this particular set of hospitals. And this was despite the fact that the app was only applicable to 1/6 of these patients. So in 2017, the UK's data protection regulator actually found that this particular NHS trust had unlawfully shared the details of 1.6 million patients with Google DeepMind. And quite a telling statement from the co-founder of DeepMind following that judgment was that they admitted that DeepMind had underestimated the complexity of the NHS and the rules, the word rules rather than legislation, and ethics around the governance of patient data. And so this is really a really good example of what can go wrong, I suppose, when we don't consider all of these factors. So technology and public understanding of data privacy, as well as our legislation, have all moved on since the 2010s. Modern health research still faces several challenges when you are sharing and accessing sensitive or personal data generally. So the one that probably we're most aware of, and probably the one that was the most important factor in the case, the example that I gave, is that challenges arise from the ethical, legal and governance restrictions around the use of these data. So modern data protection legislation like GDPR, like the UK Data Protection Act, necessitates that safeguards are put in place to prevent the disclosure and identification of individuals in those data. This legislation also governs who can access the data and also how it can be processed. And one would hope that the strength of this sort of modern legislation protects personal data much more strongly than the previous scenario. And so that than the previous legislation, and that previous scenario should not be happening again. Studies themselves or data generators themselves may also have restrictions on how the data can be used. These could stem from whether participant consent has been gained. Sometimes data sets that are collected have consent restrictions around sharing with third-party or commercial organizations, for example. A second data sharing challenge stems from intellectual property concerns. Often there's an investment in terms of time and cost that has been spent to generate these data, and you want to sort of protect that investment and any intellectual property in the data itself. this is a particular concern, for example, in low and middle income countries, where there are these rarer data sets. And finally, the data itself could be commercially sensitive. This could be either that a commercial partner holds intellectual property in the data that's been generated, or that the data itself could be commercially sensitive. For example, if there was health data linked to land contamination records or something like that. Finally, what's become more relevant over maybe the past 8 years or so is that the physical size of data is becoming prohibitive in physically sharing the data with each other. You know, what's the feasibility of giving out copies of tens of terabytes of omics data to researchers? They probably might not have anywhere to actually store that. Cross-cutting these data sharing challenges are those that are domain specific to epidemiology and health research. So first of all, our analyses must have enough statistical power for us to draw accurate conclusions about a population based on our sample subset. This is really important if our research is going to inform patient care, therapeutics, patient experience, or health policy. And because of this, we're really data hungry. We want data from lots of individuals in the population. And usually these aren't held by one organization, unless it's a national archive. So we solve this problem sometimes by working in multi-organization collaborations, nationally, regionally, internationally, agreeing to share data or access to data within the network. But this brings challenges to satisfy not just data protection legislation in one location, but in many different jurisdictions. And that's the same is also true for governance and consent as well. Even taking the example of GDPR, EU countries hold a spectrum of interpretation. And so there are more conservative views held in some countries on how certain data can be processed to be compliant with GDPR. Ultimately, our biggest challenge is time, because solving these challenges takes time. And you know, it can take more than over a year to establish just one data collaboration agreement in a consortium. So we need to be able to develop safe and secure and efficient data sharing and access methods that satisfy these legislative and governance restrictions, but that can also operate within collaborative networks and retain public trust. So in 2021, the UK government commissioned Professor Ben Goldacre to lead a review on how we can improve the safety and security in the use of health data for research in the UK. And Professor Goldacre made 185 recommendations to benefit patients and the healthcare sector. And many of these recommendations are as applicable to health data infrastructures outside the UK. It is quite a long read, but I'm just going to pull out some of the core recommendations. Particularly of interest are those around infrastructure and platforms, how to make data available safely and securely. And the recommendation is that we make trusted research environments the normal access mechanism. So trusted research environments are secure data platforms with the analytical and statistical tools embedded in them to support researchers and innovators to conduct their work. But there is a bit of a warning that we should not have too many TREs, because this will duplicate data eventually, as well as effort, and cause more inefficiency and data silos. There's a big promotion in this report about moving towards open working methods for data. So this is to be able to produce reproducible analysis pipelines, increase transparency, sharing code for data curation amongst different TREs, so that again, effort isn't duplicated. In terms of data curation, you know, basically establishing a set of common health data standards, and again, sharing these openly. Around data governance, I think in the UK, we definitely need a way to streamline and simplify data access approvals, ideally in a singular system. Basically, we have the problem that there's 160 NHS trusts, 6,500 GPs, and all of these are acting as separate data controllers under that part of the UK Data Protection Act. which aligns with GDPR. And really, you know, there's a requirement to move towards having one national organisation that acts as the data controller. In terms of recommendations for future strategies, around industry and innovation use of NHS data, the recommendation is that this happens within TREs, within trusted research environments. And this would inhibit the situation of the example I gave at the beginning of the talk with Google DeepMind. And also the recommendation is that the NHS gets appropriate and fair financial return if marketable innovations are eventually created that are based on data held in the NHS. And then the other recommendation is that to avoid getting tied to exclusive commercial agreements with private sector organisations. In terms of on the academic side, well, strategy for the academic side, the recommendation is around ensuring that people with the technical skills are those that manage technical driven projects. So to create strategic senior leadership roles for people that are developers, data architects, infrastructure experts, and data scientists. And again, developing software, method, codes that are all open, shareable, and that can be used across different organizations and TREs. So before I hand over to Ollie, I will just talk about what the UK did. So following this big review, the Goldacre review, 2 strands of infrastructure investment were initiated in the UK. The first one was along the academic research side of things, and the second strand was specific to the NHS data infrastructure. So on the academic side, £130 million of funding was made available to invest in improving the academic digital research infrastructure. And what this involved is investment across enhancing large-scale computing facilities, such as high-performance computing, cloud computing, improving and maintain data storage facilities, developing methods for investment in methods that help to share code and software, developing methods for accessing data and user authentication systems, and investment in the social infrastructure. So the analysts, the experts who develop and maintain these resources. And the last strand of investment was tailored towards a program of work dedicated to the access and analysis of sensitive research data across both health and also social research. And under this particular program, the DARE UK program, the next generation of academic trusted research environments are being built. So these will be these secure data platforms where the analytical and statistical tools that researchers and innovators need are all housed together in one secure environment. And one area of focus is in federated architecture. So that's federated data storage, federated identity management, and federated analysis. So I'm going to pass over on to Ollie, who's going to talk about the NHS side of things. And then we'll come back to the advances in federated analysis.
Great, thank you. So when we talk about the NHS, sometimes it's easy to sort of not appreciate that really we're talking about 4 different NHSs really. Within the UK, we've got NHS England, NHS Scotland, NHS Wales, and the Department of Health and Social Care in Northern Ireland. So that's 4 different national systems that, you know, they all do the same thing. They're all looking after the population that lives in it. But the way they do it is slightly different. That operational bit is a bit different. So perhaps medications are prescribed differently. Perhaps the way waiting lists are run is differently. Perhaps the amount that doctors are paid is different in the different regions. Things are a little bit different. And that means that the data that we end up collecting is a little bit different in the different regions. And there are different rules on what we can do with the data. And you know, it will be a little bit different compared to the different nations. And so that's meant that we've ended up with a series of national trusted research environments in the UK. So in Wales, we've got the secure anonymised linkage secure anonymized information linkage system, SAIL data bank. In Scotland, we've got the equivalent is EDRIS, and then in Northern Ireland, we've got the Honest Broker Service, but we don't have one for England. And, you know, that's a bit of a problem. The sorts of data that these trusted research environments have, these national ones, there's a combination of primary care data, so your sort of GP practice, your family doctor, there's hospital data, some of them have got education data linked in, others have household level stuff, environmental data, lots of really useful data that's all been linked together at the individual level level, and then it's been anonymized, and then it's made available to researchers. And typically, what happens is a researcher would log into some sort of remote trusted research environment to access the data, do their research, and they'd never know who anyone is because it's all been anonymized. But England's still missing a TRE. So this is what we're going to do in this secure data environment bit of work that Becca mentioned. Except we're not going to build a national TRE, we're going to build 11 TREs. And the reason we're doing that is because there's quite a lot of people in England. When you look at the population of Wales and Scotland, 2 or 3 million people. We're at 56, I think, in England. So it's quite difficult to build something that big. So we're building 11 regional secure data environments with varying populations. I think the smallest is 2.8 million, and the largest is 10.5, so that's London, and then lots in between. And these 11 secure data environments will between them cover the entirety of England. Now, we're calling them secure data environments and not just trusted research environments because we need to do all of that other work at the beginning. It's not just about making data available to researchers. We've got to bring it together, we've got to link it, we've got to anonymize it, we've got to make sure that it's safe for researchers to do. So there's lots of work to do up front. Now, Becca and I are we're in Liverpool in the Northwest, so that's the secure data environment that we're working on. So if we zoom in a little bit at the Northwest SDE, actually the Northwest SDE is made up of 3 different integrated care systems. So there's Lancashire and South Cumbria, Greater Manchester, and Cheshire and Merseyside. And these 3 systems together, we're designing and building the secure data environment that we want and we need for our region. Now, that of course means that amongst all the other SDEs, they're going to be slightly different because they'll have slightly different needs to meet, but you know, broadly they'll be doing the same thing. Now, what are we actually building? Well, it's going to look a bit like this. This is a very simple overview diagram. So on the left-hand side, we've got our data sources. So we've got Cheshire and Merseyside, Greater Manchester, and Lancashire and South Cumbria. There are our 3 integrated care systems. And then we also have this national data set as well. So in England, there are certain sets of data which we have to report centrally back to NHS England. So things like who's on waiting lists for stuff, who's attended the emergency department, common diseases that family doctors look after, that kind of stuff. So instead of us trying to figure all of that out ourselves, we can just pick that up from a national data store. So we'll have these 4 data stores or 4 data sources. And when a project has been signed off or been approved, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute, when a project has been approved, the relevant data for that project will flow into the trusted research environment, into a workspace where a researcher will be able to log into, do their analysis, and then when they're finished or when they want to take a plot out or some model fitting parameters or whatever, they would deposit that in an airlock, and then once somebody's had a look at it, once they've done that statistical disclosure control check, then that could be taken out and used in their papers or in reports or whatever it is they do. Now, the key point I said relevant data will get copied across. And what I mean there is if you're working on a project that just wants to do, so look at medication prescribing in a hospital, for instance, then that's the only data that would be in there. And so in that way, we're minimizing the amount of data that we transfer from each of the integrated care systems into the trusted research environment. And this is the design that we've picked locally. I think some of the other STEs are building giant data lakes, the data into it. Equally valid approach, but just sort of highlighting that there's very different infrastructures being designed and built across England. And the way we're building it is it's all going to be cloud-based. We're working on Microsoft Azure. So we're using the Azure TRE project, which is an open source project, which lets us very easily do things like provision new workspaces, sort of virtual machines. That sort of airlock functionality is built into it, and all the useful stuff like firewalls and identity management and all that kind of stuff is all built into it. So the Azure TRE project it's open source. It's not officially a Microsoft project that they sell and support, but we hope that it will become that in the near future. One of the other tools in there is around costing, so you can see how much it's currently costing to run services and whatnot, which is really important in a cloud-based environment. If you're not careful, you can very quickly run up a very big bill without realizing it. So the sort of data that we're talking about, primary care, secondary care data, lots of household data, bring education data in, all that stuff that those other national TREs have, we're going to do. We've got a very long list of data that we want to make available. And how that sort of research journey looks, the plan is to work with the HDR UK Innovation Gateway. So this is a public-facing metadata catalog, and you go to that and you can search for conditions, or soon you'll be able to search for SNOMED codes and whatnot, and it will find data sets that exist that match those criteria. And then the next step in the process would be to have some sort of cohort discovery tool where you can check that, say you're looking for asthma, it's a good idea to check that actually there's enough people in the area that you want to get the data from have that condition. Otherwise, worst case scenario, you spend 6 months getting access to the data, and then you get it, and then there's not enough people that have got that condition in it, and then you've wasted your time. Quite what that looks like and how that works, this cohort discovery tool, we're trying to figure that out. And then the sort of next step would be to apply for access to the data. Now, if we're applying for access to lots of different data sets at once, we don't want to have to put in lots of different applications at once, or rather, we don't want to have to fill in lots of different applications. So the idea is that we'll have a unified application process, which then sends off the completed applications to all of the different data controllers, and then everything should get sorted out behind the scenes, and then the researchers would get access to all of the data that they need all at once. So that should streamline the process a little bit. And then my last slides, we're going to make sure that all of the projects that are used are publicly available, so we can be as transparent to the population as possible. We're likely going to add an additional opt-out for certainly our population, our region, for this if they don't want their data used in it. We're working to convert all of our data into OMOP format. That's a common data model. And that means we'll be able to pick up analysis scripts and stuff from other regions and hopefully just run them straight away in our region. And if we've all got the same data format, we can start to look at how we can do federation as well. Why just run things locally when we can run things across the whole network? So we're just starting to have that conversation for what that looks like and what do we mean by federation and how can we do that safely and securely. And that's the perfect time for me to pass back to Becca to talk about federation.
Thanks. So taking the UK as an example, between us, we've described that we have a number of local, regional TREs and national TREs, and we're now building more TREs, both on the academic side and SDEs on the NHS side. And the reality is, how are we going to make use of modern analytical techniques, including machine learning and AI, when these data sit across different infrastructures in different locations, but without physically having to move these data between them and, essentially risking creating copies of data? How will we prevent data from being siloed as well, as has been warned in the Goldacre review? So just the next couple of slides, I'm just going to go through the sorts of options that we have when you want to analyze data that's located in different places. So first of all, some data sets could be physically moved into a national TRE, and this could happen on a project or use case basis. And what this will mean is that the individual patient data will be pulled together in one location, allowing an analyst to work with it all. And this is often known as individual patient data analysis or pooled data analysis. A second approach is a meta-analytic approach. So this is where data stays at the individual locations, the data custodians. And for example, data is analysed independently at each location. So the analyst can fit a model at this location and this location and this location separately. And this approach makes use of the individual patient data at each of the locations separately. And so the analysis is based on aggregate results coming back from each of these locations. And I've just given some examples from the UK of the sorts of projects that actually use this approach. And the third method is by using a federated analysis approach using a distributed methodology. And this can include distributed learning approaches as well as secure multi-party computing approaches. And so what happens here is that your data is located in different places, and different components of your analysis are run at each of these locations. So in this example, I've got some analysis tasks A, B, D, and F happening here. And over here, I've got analysis tasks A, C, and F happening at this location. And what we can do is mathematically combine all of these outputs in a way that will give us an answer identical to if we had physically moved these data into one central location and analysed them. Except for in this approach, this distributed and federated approach, no individual patient data has been moved, but a model can be fit on the individual patient data all at once. And so using this sort of approach actually increases the precision of analysis compared to a meta-analytic approach. So I am a PI of the DataShield software project that uses, that analyzes harmonized data from multiple locations. And DataShield has been used with real-world health data for over 10 years now. And the software actually operates essentially in two analysis modes. Every analysis function in DataShield can operate under a meta-analysis setting. So you can get an aggregate answer from each of the different locations or the data data sites that you are connected to. Or every function can operate in a distributed federated analysis method, and where the analysis makes use of all the individual patient data in a mathematically equivalent way to if you had pooled it all into one location. And how does DataShield achieve this? Well, we have written every single function from scratch and developed the statistical methods from scratch as well, so that every function can operate in this distributed analysis way to give the equivalent answer to a pooled data analysis. But also every function in DataShield only allows low-dimensional, non-disclosive summary statistics to ever leave the data controller's site. So this isn't an infrastructure talk, so I'm not going to bore everyone with exactly the infrastructure of how DataShield works. If you are interested, there's a couple of publications that you can go and look at down there. I guess just the headline summary is that Data Shield as a system acts a bit like a federated TRE. So components are split across different locations, but each of the organizations hosting a component has complete oversight and control over their component, basically. Data Shield is based entirely on open source software. It's free at the point of use, and our software code is all publicly available, and we are a highly transparent project in that respect. We've designed this software and infrastructure to be as flexible as possible and also as lightweight as possible in order to keep costs to deploy low. You only ever need to install the parts of the infrastructure that for the components you actually need to use for your data projects. It's flexible enough to be integrated into almost any existing infrastructure. And we've made sure that we align with the 5 Safes framework, as well as standard data governance practice, because our software has been developed under a co-design model. So our software has been developed being underpinned by a whole strand of ethics, legal, and data governance research, as well as analysis of stakeholder viewpoints as well, including the public. So Data Shield can also make use of lots of different data types, and this list is ever expanding. So currently structured data, so generally tabular data, also things in a common data model, OMOP, as well as omics data, and we've just initiated the ability to hold point data, so geospatial analysis will be possible as well. And you can also link out to very large data sets that are held perhaps elsewhere in your organization as well. So the Data Shield software approach gives a higher privacy approach compared to other meta-analysis, or if you physically pool the data in one location, analysis means. And one of the primary reasons is because when you're using Data Shield as an analyst, you do not ever view the individual level data that you're actually working on, and you do not actually directly connect to it either. Some of our researchers say that analyzing data in Data Shield is a bit like analyzing the data blindfolded, because you don't get to see the individual level data, which is a bit of an unusual situation to be in. All of the analysis on the individual patient data happens at the site of the data controller, and uniquely built into every Data Shield function is a range of automated checks that happen during the analysis and on outputs in order to block directly disclosive outputs being returned to the analyst. Only the data controllers can set the threshold of these automated checks. The analyst has no control over those whatsoever, but they are informed about what the thresholds are. Now, these automated checks cannot block data misuse or inferred disclosure. And so we recommend that strong data governance, including contractual terms of data use, will always be needed, because Data Shield has not been designed to be used in isolation of this. So in terms of how you interact with Data Shield, it's predominantly through an R client, so the statistical programming language R. But we have also built some Shiny apps, which provide a point and click interface, so for people that don't program. And there is also under development a Python client as well. I've just put here a snapshot of the kind of range of analytical capability that exists in Data Shield that is at various stages of testing and use with real world data. In green, we have the original libraries that our research group have built that have been fully tested and used with real world data. And these include the base functionality for any sort of beginning analysis, in exploratory analysis, data shaping, graphical outputs, regression and simpler modeling tasks, as well as functions to help developers actually build their own libraries as well. The rest of these libraries that are all in orange, yellow, and red have been built by the open source Data Shield community, and includes extensions out to handling omics analysis, RX, exposome, analytical tasks, geospatial, and also bringing new statistical techniques from machine learning methods, for example, into DataShield as well. So how is DataShield being used? Well, in terms of applications to healthcare data, Germany is leading the way in this respect. They've been using DataShield for federated analysis of healthcare data since 2018. 2 of the 4 projects funded under the 400 million euro medical informatics initiative in Germany adopted DataShield. And in addition to that, they also have a 10-year funded program, similar to the UK programs, where they're developing a fair national research data infrastructure for making use of personal health data. And DataShield is one of the 2 selected platforms for federated analysis, the other one being Personal Health Train for federated learning. In terms of UK applications to healthcare data, we have basically implemented DataShield with something known as the 5 Safes Research Object Crates. 5 Safes Research Object Crates is a merger of the 5 Safes framework and Research Object Crates. This framework governs the safe access to sensitive data and is something that has been adopted by TREs internationally. It requires data owners to deploy mitigations for the safe data, safe projects, safe people, safe settings, and safe outputs. Research Object Crates is, on the other hand, a lightweight way to capture machine-readable information about data, metadata, and your actual code during analysis. And it facilitates reproducibility, open science, and transparency. And so these 2 have been kind of merged together so that we can capture in a machine-readable way information about these 5 safes throughout the entire TRE and analysis workflow. And there's basically a huge future and huge scope for this sort of information in the 5 Safes RO crate to capture information about data provenance, software and code information, and anything relevant to audit logs and compliance checks that the data custodian is responsible for. On the NHS side, at the University of Liverpool, in collaboration with Lancashire NHS Teaching Hospitals Trust, we've just finishing up a proof of concept where DataShield has been implemented in the NHS Northwest England secure data environment. And we've got our plans, which are to actually implement a pilot across the region. I'm going to just skip forward through some of these slides because I am aware of the time. Since the introduction of GDPR, there's been a really big uptake of DataShield by European projects. And this includes 2 of the 4 Horizon Europe emergency funded programs to analyze and assess post-COVID infection. 2 of them, the Uncover and Orchestra projects, use DataShield as their analysis platform. DataShield is also being adopted more and more by global research networks, and this is basically taking lessons learned from the community experiences from European projects. We also have clinical and pharmaceuticals industry that have been trialing DataShield and evaluating its federated analytical capabilities, including IQVIA. ICON have used DataShield in a real-world study of post-vaccine syndrome following the COVID vaccination, and their analysis was across 3 sites. And Roche have also done a feasibility study of DataShield, comparing it, the DataShield analysis approach, to their standard clinical trials analyses approaches. And they will be publishing their application to real-world data at 7 hospitals in France. I would say that Roche noted that this DataShield approach guaranteed a better protection of data confidentiality than for classical studies, and that this new type of study could ultimately facilitate research carried out using patient data to validate effectiveness of new drugs, improve care pathways, or facilitate epidemic monitoring. my last set of slides, finally, I'm going to just quickly go through some of the challenges that we face in our community, DataShield community, in that whilst we're really proud that over 10 years since the software project was initiated by our research group, DataShield is still open source and free at the point of use. However, I've used this image of an empty well. Too many drinkers of a well water for free will inevitably lead to a drought. There's an extremely high DataShield user demand, and many of the groups that are using DataShield are not contributing back to the DataShield community. And this does pose a risk for the usability of the software in the future and long term. Moreover, the research funding covers the cost of new developments and new applications, but not the maintenance of the existing software. And so in the last 5 years, we've initiated several strategies to combat this. So in 2022, we moved away from DataShield being just an isolated research project developed by one singular research group, which was our research group. And this is now actually an international, collaborative, interdisciplinary community comprising academia, the public sector, small and medium enterprises, and industry. In 2022, we formalized what is now known as the DataShield community, comprising all of these stakeholders. And last year, we formalized a steering committee, which I co-chair, that governs the community and aims to streamline common processes and the management and sustainability of the software and services like training and consultancy, etc., long term. Largely, this is a bunch of volunteers and stakeholders in funded programs that are reliant on DataShield that are involved in the steering committee and the future strategy of the software. This year, we're going to be establishing our external advisory board, comprising external and independent people to DataShield to help advise our community and the open source software longer term. And in this way, we make sure that our structure is formalized in our community, that it's democratic, and that informed decisions can take place in the community about the future of the project. How can you get involved? If you want to get involved, you can start by joining our free-to-use forum, where you can engage with basically the community. Every year, we also host our conference, and this year it will be held in Bonn, in Germany, in September. And this is a really great place to get training in how to use DataShield and listen to a mix of science application talks and technical development talks. And it's a great place to network and find collaborators and people you want to work with on your next grant proposal. Different academic groups, in order to try and keep, maintain the software in a sustainable way, a lot of the different academic groups that develop in DataShield also offer paid support services around training, implementation, and also developing bespoke functionality and services. So hopefully we've given you an overview of the UK digital infrastructure landscape in both academia and the NHS, as well as the UK plans around storing, accessing, and analysing sensitive healthcare data. The next steps really in the UK is to bring things together and actually be able to do some sort of federated analysis across this network of secure data environments and trusted research environments. And our project DataShield is really well placed to contribute to this because it's been established. It's an established open source tool. It's transparent and flexible with over 10 years use with real world data. I estimated for another talk, that there's around £250 million worth of research funding invested in academic research programs globally that are currently reliant on DataShield. And that's a very conservative estimate because it doesn't account for SME and industry use and any consortia that we're not directly involved in. So DataShield is now a piece of core analytical software in the global health research domain. And we've got a growing, dynamic and multi-sector community that is shaping its future. So I'm going to leave it there because we've covered a lot of different things, and hopefully we've got some time for questions.
Thank you, Vika. Thank you for this very strong statement about what's happening in the global health and distributed analysis and using safe ways to access health data, and also this nice view of open science in the field of health. Any questions, any comments?
Hello, Becca and Oli. This is Cristóbal. Thank you very much for your presentation. Well, my question is regarding, we are starting to work with data, and we are trying to do something like a theory in the future. But nowadays we are dealing with issues like data quality, which are regarding the data entry and the data capture software. So if the EHR is only plain text and doesn't has too many structured data, you can do a federated analysis of free text. It's complicated, of course, and it has different challenges. But what I'm trying to say is that, have you ever think about like adding a layer of NLP to translate and in some way try to make cohort or everything based on NLP on site, and after that try to use that kind of information into a federated analysis? What I'm trying to say is that in our scenario is that when you go to a hospital, you're going to say, I don't know, go and look at the diagnosis and look at the frequency of one pathology, and you will find something that is not the reality because it's based on the data entry of the physicians. So even with this kind of structured data, you have these challenges. But what I'm trying to say specifically is regarding the transformation from NLP, from free text, from notes from the clinicians to structured data in order to do the federated analysis with that data.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's such a difficult problem, and we see that all the time in the NHS. There are several projects around, particularly around the mental health side of stuff in our region, where there's a lot of free text data where we're only really just starting to use natural language processing to try and get sentiment out of the data and to try to understand what's really going on. And yeah, I mean, one of the things we are trying to do a bit more is to try and make that problem a bit less, working more closely with the hospitals when they're buying their systems, designing their systems, to try and make sure that there is much more structured data there where possible. But yeah, I'd say we're only really just starting on that journey for how we do NLP on that kind of data, if I'm honest.
It's true. It's like the input. If you can structure the input from some point from now towards the future in a structured way, then that will facilitate that. It will make it easier to extract information that's like for like across different places as well. But I think it's like for us, from a data shield context, I suppose it's like we would probably take the approach where we'd use NLP to extract information, extract the structured data from the information, and hold that structured data that's linked to maybe other biomedical information about those patients, and use that held in data shield and harmonize that across multiple locations in order to analyze it. But the extraction is really difficult because all the clinicians, I'm looking at you, Miguel, all the clinicians write shorthand, don't they? Different abbreviations, different shorthand, and shorthand in one region will be different to shorthand at another hospital. Even clinicians in the same hospital use the different notations, right, for the same phrase or the same drug. So it's very difficult.
Yeah, this is a really nice question, because also we have a lot of discussions about this topic with Cristóbal, because Cristóbal is all the time saying that we have to put our work efforts into the data capture and working more closely with the health providers to changing the point of the capture more than just working with dirty data. Any other comments, Cristóbal?
I totally agree, and indeed we have this complexity regarding the Spanish we speak here in Chile. We have a lot of different differences from Argentina and even close countries. And as you know, an NLP is very different and very localized the way the physicians write. In my opinion, it's also something that we have to be clear that the expression that you can have for a person in the free text is not addressable in the structured data. And you have to deal with that because there are two visions. One is only free text, and the other one is only structured data. But you have to be in the middle for instance, in the psychiatry settings, like they write a lot, and in our country we have the reality of use ICD-10s, straightforward in the EHR, so that's very complex too. But at the end, I think there are two sides of this. One is that you can get rid of free text, and free text also adds a layer of expression and something that you can get by structured data, but also you have to be aware that you have to transform that free text into structured data in order to do analysis in the way you are showing us. So the idea at the end is that maybe adding a layer of NLP on-site, translating that in a structured way into a structured data, right, or in a framework of transformation could be very useful in order to extract data from something that you can't extract data at the end otherwise, right? And we've done that. In one hospital, we did an analysis with diagnosis, like 4% of diabetes, with with a lab, it went to 9%, and when free text, it went to 13% was the prevalence we were expecting in that population. So in that way, it's very important because in that way you can define a cohort, which is the starting point of everything at the end of what you show us. So adding this NLP maybe in our reality could be very useful, principally in the first stages of developing something in the way of federated analysis. If you don't have like reimbursement based on documentation, there's no also some incentive for documenting from the physicians in a structured way. So we have to deal with that and culture and everything. But thank you very much again.
Yeah, I was going to make just one comment about what is, in order to get the people inputting the data, whoever that may be, at the patient end, is how do you incentivize them to do that? Yeah, what are they going to get out of this if they're in order to nudge them towards putting a higher quality, inputting higher quality data in the first place, or much more structured data in the first place? And that's different for every every hospital potentially, or every geographic region as well. So it might be that seeing that end product, like seeing the end use, or some financial remuneration, or a political or policy something impact. There has to be some way to convey and incentivize this.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Well, thank you very much, Becca and Will. I'm so grateful for you presenting today. And also I want to announce that we are working together in a memorandum of understanding for collaborate between Liverpool and the Universidad, Desarrollo, to work together to bring some of these lessons that the UK is doing in the field of health data, and to make some of these improvements for our health population. Thank you. Come on, guys.
Thanks, bye.
See you soon.